Welcome back. The government has been talking for ages now about how to keep us safe on the internet. But their online safety bill is still to come before Parliament. A joint committee of MPs has put out a report today proposing a series of recommendations. They include making tech giants abide by UK law, take responsibility for what is published on their platforms. Joining me now is Lucy Powell, the new Shadow Culture Secretary. Welcome to the show, Lucy.
Good afternoon.
Before we talk about online harm, I just want to ask you about the fact that you're having a poll boost. No doubt about that. It's not surprising given the government's current woes. But why is it the Lib Dems rather than the Labour Party that are the bookies' favourites in North Shropshire?
Well, you probably have to ask the bookies about that. But look, I mean, North Shropshire obviously is a very, very staunch Conservative seat. I think it's always been Conservative and they've had a very big majority there for a long time. But we've been fighting for every vote. We've got an excellent local candidate. I'm actually going there tomorrow as a member of the Shadow Cabinet. We've had Angela Rayner there today. So, you know, we're very much sort of in the running for taking votes in that seat. And I think what people will probably see is that the result of the by-election is more about a verdict on the Prime Minister and the double standards that he's been displaying and how people feel about that than it is any kind of indication about Labour.
OK, let's talk about the report that is out today from MPs on online harm. Online abuse, losing money through being scammed, young people being targeted with content that promotes self-harm or abuse. Is it the hope that all of these things will be tackled when the government finally bring forward new laws on online harms?
Well, I really hope so, because, you know, you're absolutely right to point to just a few of the issues that we're facing in this digital age. And it's been 10 years or more since we last had any kind of Communications Act. And that was when we were pretty much in the analogue age. So we've got analogue regulation trying to operate in this digital age, and it really isn't fit for purpose. The government promised this online harms bill 3.5 years ago, and it had been in the offing for a couple of years before that. So they really are dragging their feet, and it has taken an incredible amount of time. And the draft bill they came up with a few months ago, I'm afraid just wasn't really fit for purpose. It was very complicated, it was very unclear, and it was too weak on a lot of the regulation that we needed to have. So this joint committee report, which has scrutinised that draft legislation, is an excellent report that's out today. And I think if the government take on board all their 200 pages of recommendations, then it will really strengthen and simplify the bill. And that's what I want to see the government doing. And I want to see them doing that quickly so that we don't have any more delays to this bill becoming law. And there are things we could do straight away, to be honest, because there are things we could do outside of this bill. For example, like making it illegal to do cyber flashing, for example, and some of those things, we could bring that in other ways through other bills in Parliament.
The Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen said these companies have a business model based on holding users' attention for as long as possible, and they prioritise that over safety. When I read that, I thought, well, that's what television does, or newspapers do, or clothes shops do, for that matter. Isn't that just business?
Well, of course, television programmes, your programme as a broadcaster, newspapers and others are regulated in this way, and do have regulations that you have to adhere to make sure that what you're doing is factual, you know, isn't sort of spreading kind of fake news, that you are considering any harmful effects of what you're broadcasting and so on. But the social media giants and the tech giants aren't subject to any of that regulation really at all. So there isn't a level playing field when it comes to those things. So obviously that needs addressing. But it's not just about the content, which of course is very important, but it's also the practices and business models which amplify the way in which some of those harmful contents are shared. So I give an example, you know, obviously we've seen a big rise in sort of self-harm and teenagers suicide and that kind of thing. And, you know, what happens often is that if a teenager is searching for or looking at self-harm on a social media site or looking at how to kill oneself, what they'll find is that they're then actually more of that information is shared with them, and they see more and more of it, because the way these algorithms work, the way the business models work, is that it amplifies more and more of what you've wanted to look at once before. So it's not just about the content itself, but it's about the way in which it's also being amplified and shared. And that is a systematic problem, which is why it needs regulation.
And what about conspiracy theories? They're not illegal, but to some they are harmful. 20 or so years ago, the Daily Mail ran an anti-MMR campaign that gave huge prominence to Andrew Wakefield, a doctor. What if that was done online about the COVID vaccine? It's not illegal to do so.
Well, that's why I think what the Joint Committee is proposing is that there are codes of practice, and those code of practice are drawn up by Ofcom as an independent regulator, and those codes of practice, the big tech companies are therefore required to abide by those codes of practice, and they are kind of legally and regulatory binding on them, rather than the sort of tech companies themselves making judgments about whether something is or isn't harmful. I think there was a lot of concern about that, and that's what was in the draft bill. So those codes of practice would establish, to some degree, the difference between kind of harmful and non-harmful content that's done by the regulator and not by the tech companies themselves. But you make a fair point, which is about keeping that balance between the right of free speech and the right of people, especially young people, to be protected from harmful content. And as I said before, it's not just about the content itself, but it's about the way in which then that content gets amplified to you as a vulnerable user, that you then might be more susceptible to it. So that might be an issue rather than the content itself.
Lucy Powell, Shadow Culture Secretary. The first time you've been on my show, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Yes, lovely to be here. Thanks, Gloria.
Thank you.